Hi, I'm Rodi Srivastava,
I'm Anuradha Nagraj.
and this is The Migration Story.
In 2011, after leaving school in a small Jamtara village, Mandal had boarded a train to Mumbai. He had nothing planned for when he arrived. Hordes of young men had headed out in the age of rapid urbanization, hoping to pick up connections and learn a skill that would make their fortune. Many ended up on construction sites in big cities and others in domestic service, retail, or restaurants. It didn't matter. Anything was better than staying in Jamtara. He and the others had no intention of walking barefoot along dirt roads, balancing metal baskets laden with coal on his head. Here in India's coal heartland, that had been the only alternative to farm work for more than 2 centuries. Over the next 5 years, Mandal worked at a roadside eatery, a railway station retailer, and finally a shop where people bought top-ups for their mobile phones. It was that last job where he learned the particular skill that made his fortune: clearing strangers' bank accounts using a mobile phone. This is an excerpt from the book Scamlands Inside the Asian Empire of Fraud That Preys on the World by Snigdha Poonam, a book that just does not talk about a crime but analyzes how deception reshapes economies and communities.
You couldn't just drive into these villages. They're physically remote. They're geographically sort of hard terrains. In Assam, I used to take a boat to go to some of these villages in Jharkhand.
नमस्कार सर, मैं STI बैंक से बबीता कौशिक बात कर रही हूँ।
बैंक से?
जी सर बताना चाहूँगी कि आपके खाते को 50,000 की लॉटरी लगी है। सर, नाम की राशि पाने के लिए आपको आपके कार्ड्स की डिटेल्स कंफर्म करानी होगी।
And from that scam money, you have so many things. As you put yourself in some villages, they would build roads, and these families. Sometimes they were building ration shops.
हेलो सर, आपका क्रेडिट पॉइंट अगले हफ्ते एक्सपायर हो रहा है। इसके लिए कंपनी आपको गोवा में 5 दिनों की छुट्टी पैकेज दे रही है।
If you're looking at it from the law enforcement perspective, you can't just arrest one person or arrest a group of people or go and bust a call center or bust someone, like raid a few houses, and because it operates at the level of the community.
Hi, I'm Aishwarya Mohanty, special correspondent at The Migration Story, and you are listening to the Migration Story podcast. Across India, millions of young people leave villages like Jamtara every year. They leave farms, coal roads, inherited occupations, chasing cities that promise dignity, skill, connection, and fortune. Some find work in construction, retail, or restaurants, some find instability, and some, as Snigdha Poonam documents in the Scamland, find something else entirely. To unpack all of this, today we are joined by Snigdha, a journalist and author whose work over 15 years has shown how major global phenomena shape human lives, often by focusing on a single person, group, or event, to reveal how transformative forces act on society. Welcome to the podcast, Snigdha. We're really excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be talking to you.
So, to begin with, we wanted to understand, when we talk about scams, we usually focus on the victims.
Yeah.
And in India, Jamtara has almost become a shorthand for phishing, so to say. It has been also extensively covered. There's a Netflix series, but in the book, there's a profile of a person who hasn't watched this popular series. So, your book goes somewhere much deeper. We are not just looking at people who are scammed, but also looking at who joins it and why. So, why would a graduate from a marginalized community or an engineering degree holder with no job or a migrant who failed in the city choose this path? What did you discover when you looked past the headlines about why these young men step into this economy?
I look at various kinds of scam networks within the larger fraud economy, as I call it. And so for each of these scam networks, you'll have a different kind of person joining. And that is influenced by where they come from, like in the, very interestingly, like in the formal economy, where they come from, the region, their education levels, the language they speak, how their sort of, community is structured on the ground. So like, say, since we, begin talking about Jamtara, first we're talking about Jharkhand, where migration has been. Migration is a sort of like established pattern, right? For young people who come out of school or don't even graduate, men, women, they all, most of them go out and search of work. It'll be different from, again, within Jharkhand, which region they're from, whether they're men or women, whether they are tribal or non-tribal. But looking just at Jamtara, this is a region where I grew up as well, in sort of the rural heartlands of Santhal Pargana. And from here, I think from 2010s or even like a little bit before that, you started to see this wave of migration towards the big cities, because suddenly there was just so much work in construction mainly, but also like small other sites, like people would also come to become security guards and work in shops, factories. And so in some sense, what used to be a very kind of like bleak and low income scenario, working on the fields, on someone else's field, or working in and sort of unorganized, informal coal mine. So then this alternative opened up, and the young men started to go out in large numbers, and they would go to from anywhere between the nearest city, which is Asansol, to Delhi, to Bombay. And so they started going out in the waves. So then, they're very different from like college graduates that come out, that migrate to say Delhi or Bombay and start the sort of more organized scam call centers. Because these people have very little, like, even though they have gone to school, they don't have that much formal education, they don't have any skills. So the first things that they learn after they migrated to the cities. So whether they work if they're working in construction, they picked up languages. So that's what a lot of them would tell me, that if they were working on construction sites, and they would be sort of surrounded by other men, young men who were coming from Gujarat, who were coming from Haryana, UP, and so they would pick up languages, and languages is a huge skill, right? When you're talking about scam as work, because when they go back to Jamtara and they're calling someone, they'll divide themselves, so that if someone who knows Gujarati will be given a target base of Gujarati. So that was the first skill. But then also like the technical skills, there's so many different skills that make up a single scam, which is what people don't realize. Like, someone will write a script, someone will also like try to sort of like make even these malicious links that you're sent, or something as simple as like what they call social engineering, which is most of us know now that our OTPs, that we give our OTPs to the scammers. It's not like they are sort of the way that they put it, it's not like they are robbing us of the money in our bank account. We invite them into our bank account by giving them the OTP. So how to get that from someone, a stranger? So these are the skills that they would like. So like for Sitaram Mandal, the people would say that when he was working at the mobile shop, someone told him, okay, this is how you can steal money from someone's bank account without, you don't have to there's no stealing involved, there's no robbing involved. You just have to use the mobile phone, and then sort of some of the technical things that go with it. Even if you have, like, say, someone's OTP, even if you have someone's CVV, you still have to have some basic technical fluency to transfer money. Once they are in our bank account, they still need to transfer the money to someone else's bank account, or to try to use e-wallets, etc. So all of these skills, they're mostly in the first generation. They learned when they went out.
So we can also look at them as this entire people coming back to their village, calling it reverse migration if we can. And there's always this idea of better remittance, but there's also this idea of better skills now. And when they come back to their village, and like you've also described in the book, the way they have built up their villages now, their homes and the amenities and everything that they could provide to their families.
Yeah.
So livelihood in a village is something very important whenever we speak about migration. And here in this case, it is the scam economy. So how did you look at it, and what was people's response to building this entire economy?
The cyber families, the families of cyber chores, as they call them, they had sons who had gone out and come back. So I think there was the trend of reverse migration in that. And as one of them told me, we went out and we used to work in construction for some for an exploitative cause, and we came back and we learned these skills. We came back, and they never mentioned what skills, and in this end, then we became our own masters. So it was for me to then sort of understand, sort of to take that to understand that this is the scamming is the skill that they learned, and so then they don't need to go back now. But for some of the other families, it was also like quite normal that the guys would stay on the farm or stay sort of at home in the village for one season and work in their family's farm. And then for the next season, sort of go out or not do the farm work, but like work in the local cyber chore network. So there was also, a back and forth between these sort of like parallel, like sort of formal and underground economy. And then the money was constantly sort of flowing back and forth, which I found really interesting in that. So how do you call that an underground economy? When from that scam money, you have so many things, as you put it yourself, in some villages, they would build roads and they like these families. Sometimes they were building ration shops. In this particular family that I interviewed, they had built a barber shop and a ration shop. So there was also, like I said, I was really curious. So if that sort of picks up, then what does that mean? That these guys and they join the more sort of mainstream labor force, they don't go back. But then I realized over time that the money in the scam business is so vast, like enormous amounts of money, as they would tell me, you can make if you just stick around. If you just like spend and they would say, as with any professional field of work, the more time you spend, the more dedicated you are, the more like quickly you pick up stuff, the network, the contacts, and so some of them would do really well. And then there is, you can sit at your barber shop, or you can sit at your corner store, but then and that too was a part of the larger household income. And there was also like then the farming, because some of the fathers still very active on the farms. So whether they work on someone's farm or they've started buying their own plot of land, so the fathers would do that, and the sons would do a mix of the underground and formal labor work. So it was all quite mixed up, which for me was a more interesting story than the story of the heist story, what I call the Ocean's 11 aspect to Jamtara, which is also very interesting and very true. But like this back and forth, this sort of looping back and loop, like, the scam money looping into the formal economy, and someone starting a school. And in this instance of this particular village where I focus, there's money going into elections. The MLA is funding his sort of election campaign based, drawing money from the scamsters. And there's like obviously like lots of different sectors that have opened up entirely to oil this quite scam business. So lots of people like guys, especially like men, young men, they used to open these customer service points where just to like facilitate the money, the transfer of money. So to fake bank transfer, fake bank accounts, or fake SIM cards. So that the way that it just shaped a totally new kind of economy, call it like, not entirely guerrilla economy, but because also it's patronized by the MLAs and the mukhias, and of course the police takes bribes from them. So it's its own kind of phenomenon.
Correct. So even like you mentioned about the entire economy, the way it has been set up and how it's functioning like a very formal economy. What's also interesting is this entire setting. Like again, like the chapter reads, and like you've been also mentioning, that scamming is the new farming, and it's like very organized and technologically savvy, and they're emerging from these very nondescript rural villages, places which are like far removed from the hustle or the corporate glass buildings or even the formal paperwork systems like in the big cities. So, what is it about these hinterland sittings, economically, socially, or structurally, that makes them a fertile ground for something this sophisticated or this structured, so to say? And why wouldn't this scale in the same way inside, say, a productive urban economy? What's your understanding or take on it?
Jamtara has now become kind of a master location. These kinds of networks, these networks of cyber scams were spreading in so many parts of India. There are some pockets of like rural political economy that really support these scams. So because like they can't thrive without the system and on the ground being a part of it. But like most of them, the grassroots scams that I talk about are decentralized. In that there is no mastermind. I mean, each village will have its own sort of leading person or a small group of people that are more active than the others, but it's totally decentralized. if you're looking at it from the law enforcement perspective, you can't just like arrest one person, or arrest a group of people, or go and bust a call center, or bust someone, like raid a few houses. And so in that, because it operates at the level of the community, and in every other person has something small, some small role to play. Like there'll be, in Jamtara, for example, there were people whose job was quite specified in that sometimes their role was only to work as Amazon delivery people, so that when the scamsters order these very expensive things using our bank, impersonating us using our bank accounts, they will use some imaginary address in their village, and so the delivery people have to be in on it. So in that sense, the whole community must cooperate, otherwise they can't thrive, they can't continue. The other aspect was like most of these areas, and I've concentrated on Jharkhand and one community in Jharkhand, another in Assam. These are remote areas. In both the places, in Jharkhand and in Assam, even like 10 or 15, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been you couldn't just drive into these villages. They're physically remote. They're geographically sort of hard terrains. In Assam, I used to take a boat to go to some of these villages in Jharkhand, as well. Like the geography of Santal Pargana, these surrounded by these tall, no, not so much tall, but like really sort of a thick circle of these rugged mountains, and like really this hard terrain where only in the last few years we've had roads going into these villages. So that means that even if you're trying to find out or counter these scams, or target the scamsters, it's very hard. So even for the police, for example, if like say that someone in Delhi, which is often the case, has lost 30 lakh to someone in Jamtara, the police will have to wonder about whether 30 lakh is enough money lost on one person to even undertake a journey to Jamtara. So what happens is that they'll keep sitting on these complaints, and every once in a while they'll have like 10 or 15 these things, or there'll be like someone really big, like the chief minister's wife's nephew gets scammed, or some some IS officer gets scammed, and then so they'll then send a team to Jamtara, because that itself is a high stakes enterprise on the part of the police. So then those things are not things that we write about when we're writing about the scams. Without those aspects, these scams cannot thrive. But then for an urban setting, you need to have a different kind of scam, which is the call center scams that I write about, which happen in a much more formal setting. They work in a they look like, you could walk into these offices in Gurgaon, you will have no idea what's going on in these offices. They just look like any sort of multinational corporation. Lots of people, like recent graduates, and they're mostly like people in their 20s, wearing formal wear, speaking English. They have salaries, they have company sort of like, they have like morning meetings, and they have a very organized sort of structure in which sort of work flows through the day. So so then for that you will really need to cultivate your sources. Sometimes I would find them on LinkedIn or something, and I'll ask them, what really do you do at work? Even if I went in to their office, I couldn't just look at the computer and say, oh, they're taking part in a scam. So for an urban setting, those kinds of scams have really now set deep roots, because you have such a vast population of people who come from these provincial colleges after graduating to cities like Delhi, Bangalore, Thane. They want entry-level jobs, office jobs, first-generation office job seekers. So they get absorbed by this fake call center economy in massive numbers. So then in urban setting you need a different kind of scams that are more anonymous, where you need a facade of like white collar work. Whereas like compare that to Jamtara, where you walk into a village and it's like everyone kind of will openly tell you that our boy is a cyber, or my friend is a cyber. So it's a बहुत ही different था एक दूसरे से. And I guess you also have to start to admire the ingenuity behind each of these scams, because they totally understand what will it take for the scams to not just emerge. Like idea तो किसी को भी आ सकता है, But I like to keep that going over years and years, now decades. Some of these scams have sort of thrived over decades, and now there's a whole parallel sectors within this illegal economy. Sectors when someone, like, say, whether I've graduated or I've dropped out of school, I can choose what sector of within the scam economy will take me in.
That's very interesting. There was another thing that I think throughout all profiles that you have captured in the book. Most of them, you have mentioned how they did not show remorse, or they felt that this wasn't wrong to the large extent that others who would be reading about it would feel like. I felt that there was a reiteration of it at a lot of points. So was that reiteration intentional, or how could you shed some more light on it?
Yes, it is intentional. I did make notes for myself to keep asking that question and also see these stories from the perspective of a reader. Each scam has two major protagonists. There is a scammer, and for most of the scams, not all, there is a person who's a victim. And not all in the sense, sometimes it can be the government or it can be a corporate company, like with the insurance, life insurance scams. So you don't have a sense of like a person being devastated. But in most of the other scams, there is. Fraud is an economic crime. It is also like a deeply emotional crime in that, even if they only speak to their victims for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and in some cases, in the scams that I have written about, they form relationships lasting months. They have to develop a bond with the person on the other end of the line. Trust sometimes, offering love sometimes, really sort of tapping into their deepest fears, desires, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. So quite early on, I guess before I even started knew that I would be writing this book, I used to talk to these call center scammers on the outskirts of Delhi, and their job was very defined. They had to, target older people in the West, mostly Americans. And it's something that they would bring up themselves, like how they feel after a call like this. Once they have been on the phone, once they've told their whole, fake script, how they sort of exercise their full range of social engineering and scam, goes through successfully, paise aa gaye hain. And but they do, once they go home or leave their jobs, they do wonder about what it was like for that person. And so there is an aspect of whether, like there's a moral cost, and they are quite conscious of it. And it varies from person to person how they deal with that baggage. So that was for me something that I really was interested in. For each of these people, how do they see that? How do they make sense of? How do they make their peace with that? Like for someone like Jeetu, the justification is one of the justifications, and he goes into it, is this atmosphere of panic and anxiety that this work involves, and how there's not a moment of peace for them, and that itself is a punishment. For someone else, it could be, they'll talk quite eloquently about global inequality if they are targeting people in the West, or even like entrenched discrimination, caste discrimination at the grassroots. I mean, Jeetu, he himself volunteers to tell me about how these scams are also like kind of overlap with a more sort of overtly political caste, like assertion of caste pride, with Dalit parties emerging. A bunch of Dalit guys will say, let's start something. Let's fight panchayat elections on our own. And these scams and the way that they were getting intertwined with that more political caste assertion is something that they would talk about. So they don't just see themselves as scamsters; they also see themselves as part of the broader society, and they have a very sharp sense of who the victim is, because that's again like that is a skill that they must develop. For if you are trying to target a person, then you need to know what kind of person are you going for. Like for Jeetu, the scamster in Jamtara, is very clear that his victim is in a city. It's someone like me, as he tells me, someone with a white collar job, someone with family capital, with connections, someone who lives a much more comfortable, convenient life. And, like in the case of Assam, where the victims weren't wasn't a person but the government, then they used to just think about the government itself profits from corruption at every level. So then you give yourself that justification, or you give yourself the justification of your victim just being so far away that you don't feel their pain. So that's why these Indians are make up such a large workforce of in the larger transnational scam economy, where someone sitting in India might be, impersonating someone in Russia and then trying to scam someone in Australia, and that also is a setup where you don't really think about your victims because there's so many levels of anonymity. There's so many walls between you and the victim. So for each of these scams, I think the moral baggage was, a very distinct part of the story, and so I wanted to bring that out.
Listeners, do stay tuned. We'll be back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Ashwara Mohanty, special correspondent at The Migration Story, and I want to tell you about a story that begins with something quite ordinary, a message on WhatsApp. But the message was coming from something called Bandhu, that translates to friend, a chatbot designed by Gram Vikas to help track migrant workers from Odisha. Migrants or their families can simply share details about where they're going, what work they're doing, and how they can be contacted in case of any emergency. If you want to read more about what this initiative is and why this initiative is required in the first place, please head out to The Migration Story, where you can find the full report. Now we'll move to the second part of your book, and where we are moving beyond India's borders. And currently also we see a lot of these reports covered in the media where young people are being trafficked or coerced into working at these scam centers, especially in parts of Southeast Asia. And then there are these rescue operations, there are international interventions and stories of people forced into a digital fraud under threat. In your book, we had these profiles, we had these characters of Irfan and Deepika, if I'm not wrong, where you very vividly spoke about how they got into that space and how they were rescued and how they came out of it. But there's also a sense of, again, which you've also mentioned, how there are people who are willingly there. So in your reporting for the book, was there something that struck you very specifically about how these networks recruit, coerce, or normalize this entire participation? And what did you discover when you look beyond just the headlines of rescued victims? Like, how do these transnational scam economy actually function?
Well, I guess, in most of the digital scams that they're seeing that target us, including some of the homespun scams, like the book starts with the lottery scams that uh, impersonate, or that or they call themselves the KBC lotteries, or misuse KBC's Kaun Badega Crorepati's promise, the promise of quick money lottery, big lotteries, and you see in the book that even those scams, like something that seems so small, someone is trying to get 10,000, 20,000 rupees from you from one call, are traveling across borders. The person might be calling you from somewhere in Bihar, but he might have a collaborator somewhere outside of India, or he might be working for someone who is sitting in a place that he does not know the person. He does not know where his employer is. He does not know why they are doing this. It just becomes a job for them. And so that is how the story kind of moves from scams that we see in Jamtara or in Assam, where you have a more sort of, the communities in these places control what happens. They're very sort of local in who works in them, who profits from them, how the money gets distributed. But we're all sort of, living in a time where most of our work, your work, my work, is facilitated, in some sense by the fact that we can work with anyone, anywhere in the world through technology, through Zoom, through open, visa on arrival schemes and cheap flights. And so in that sense, it's like the book is also the story of how fraud today is the story of globalization. And I make the claim that perhaps vice versa. So it's the same for the scamsters. And in many ways, the book just tells you that whatever, in however way we think of the world today, technology, globalization, economy, they too are in this in the same working in the same system, trying to use the same systems. It's just that they're doing that in ways that are underground and illegal. So they so for many of them today, the millions of people today who work in the scam industry, they work for networks that are not based in India. So the pig butchering scams from Southeast Asia are just one of those scams where the young people in from India are being trafficked to these cyber scam compounds in the Southeast Asia. They go to the cities that are being entirely sort of set up, built from scratch to provide or sort of act as a physical and digital infrastructure for very sophisticated digital scams that target the whole world. You in every floor you'll have a scam with a different sort of target base. There could be the digital arrest scams targeting Indians. You could have these cryptocurrency scams targeting people in America. You could have like a floor where people only are trying to scam people in the UK by saying they work for their revenue service, His Majesty Customs and Revenues, and so it becomes harder and harder to define these scams as these are Indian scamsters or to then sort of pin blame on find masterminds, so to say, or to find who's profiting from them. And so then, these young Indians just become like just entry-level players for these very organized, very sophisticated cybercrime networks. And it's also like then this, the story enters, and I think it will happen to most of the digital crimes. It enters a more unambiguous zone of criminality where, you could be working for someone who once they have bought you, because that is how the scam slavery works as a phenomenon. Once they've bought you as a slave, you cannot leave leave these compounds. You cannot leave their employment until you've paid them back the money. So it's also like then situation where if you don't scam, it's just not your moral baggage. It's also the physical danger that you face from, like I said, these unambiguous criminal networks. So, once you are in these compounds in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Laos, you have to show up to work because if you don't, they'll starve you, they'll torture you, so that's, in a sense, was for me a way to show where, most of these scams are going as a trend.
Right. So, to conclude, just going back to a point that you touched upon earlier about accountability. So when we are looking at this entire network, like you've also mentioned just now about the deaths that have happened, the coercion that happens. But even in Jamtara, where it's very much voluntary, and even across the border, where the small hubs of Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, the way it is happening, and there are a lot of cases of trafficking which are being reported. How do you see the role of state in all of this? Do you think it's simply a story of law enforcement versus crime, or where does the accountability really lie?
It's different for different scams. In a Jamtara scam, the accountability is to a fair degree on the scamster who's calling you, but it also he's operating in the larger political economy. So you also have the police and the politicians, and what I describe in the book is the ways in which this old infrastructure of corruption that we already had for hundreds of years. We've had a whole setup that has, that's well oiled, that works for anyone who wants to make an illegal, under the table gain from at any level. They will have to bribe, they will have to use manipulation, they will, so like say that if a fund was, a fund to build a road was to come to a village, well, a part of that fund will actually sort of build the road, right? And we all know that. That's a story that we've grown up reading and watching, and we've totally internalized it. Now, if you the same infrastructure of corruption then also help someone who wants to use it from upside down. So, like someone from like Jitu, when he has figured out a scam and he wants to make money and he wants to keep on making money. Then he also has to bribe people. He also has to bribe the police. कि उसके घर पे raid ना हो. The mukhia will bail him out if the police raids him and takes him to jail. The mukhia gets a few lakh rupees from his family. So, I've described the role of the politician, how this kind of is very deeply intertwined with even like electoral politics, and the bureaucrats will have to play a part. So, in that sense, you can't look at accountability as being totally sort of separately for these scams. So in that sense, it's like we think of accountability for any form of corruption, and so you can't just blame the person who has illegally taken money from someone, but everyone else who's played a role, and that was true from something as isolated and sort of homespun as Jamtara to the fraud factories of Myanmar, Laos, because in Southeast Asia, as in India, corruption. I mean, it's not like a total implant from here to there, but in some sense, there are similar infrastructures of corruption. So even in Cambodia, I could see that in a small province, if you have a scam compound, they were paying the local police station, the province, the chief of police for their province. These scam compounds had ownership structures, or like some of these compounds, the real estate was owned by someone who could have a very clear and strong link to some of the biggest corporate chains in Cambodia working across Southeast Asia. So it was really difficult to say that the accountability only fell on the scamsters who were sending out the messages or making the calls, because these scams, whether in Jamtara or in Cambodia, will not survive without the larger sort of nexus of politics, crime, business, governance, state. Different, of course, like each of these cases, it was really interesting to me what that nexus was and how that patronized and enabled these scams. But also in each case, it was true that there was a nexus.
Thank you, Snigdha. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights and answering all our questions. The book definitely is very, very engaging, and we'll urge all the audiences listening to it to get a copy and read it thoroughly to understand more about how the scam lands are functioning. So thank you so much once again for your inputs.
Thank you. Really good questions. I really enjoyed answering them.
Check out our website www.themigrationstory.com for more content. You can subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify. The audio editing and sound design is by Akshay Ramuhalli. Stay tuned for more stories on migration.
The Migration Story.